Good afternoon and welcome to the webinar, The Effects of the Pandemic on the Construction Supply Chain in Uganda. This webinar is brought to you by the API Summit Virtual and Turner & Townsend and forms part of our preview webinar series leading up to the API Virtual event taking place next week. This year's API Summit gathering is taking place online and will provide attendees with 5 days of networking, content and leading insights, as well as access to the Africa PropTech Forum and API Awards. We already have over 500 registered attendees and over 100 confirmed speakers for the event. We have now also introduced limited free access passes, which are now available. So for more information or to register online, please visit our API Summit website. I would now like to move on to today's proceedings. Elizabeth Natakunda, Regional Director, Turner & Townsend, Uganda, will start off today's sessions with a presentation and then lead us into the discussion with our esteemed panel of experts. Thank you all for joining us today, and thank you to Turner & Townsend for making this webinar possible. I'll now hand over to Elizabeth, who will begin with the presentation and then introduce and call on the panelists to join in the discussion. Thank you. And,
thank you. Thank you very much, Kifa. Hold on. My name is Elizabeth Natkunda. I'm a country director at Turner & Townsend, Uganda. We've been in the market for over 10 years, and within the region, we've actually been there for 30 years. We are a data-led project managers and quantity surveyors in the infrastructure and property sector, and we look forward to this discussion. Some of the projects that have informed our views and in terms of to make this discussion relevant is that we're currently working on the Kampala Industrial and Business Park. That's in Kampala. We're also working on the Aga Khan Hospital, which is a 150-bed hospital that's just starting. We're also working on the Kampala International Airport and Pearl Marina Estate, which is a residential and commercial project. The important components of our supply chain. As Turner & Townsend, we support our clients at different stages. That's right through from the planning stage, sourcing out materials, whether it's in discussions with suppliers right from locally, suppliers from China, India, or Italy. We also look at discussions with manufacturers, and of course from this discussion, you'll notice we have Lafarge involved in the discussion. We also look at delivery and logistics, and then of course the overall implementation of the project right from the inception till the end, and we're responsible for that whole value chain. Just going through in terms of how COVID started to impact the supply chain. Globally, the pandemic of course started in December, and that affected the overall global supply chain, in that most of the items are usually manufactured in China. We usually had, especially the ones that are imported in Uganda. Uganda first got its first case in March 2020. In terms of the case, we had a total ban or lockdown of both public and private transportation by the end of the month, which was the 30th of March. We, of course, with that, there was a presidential directive where curfews and movements were limited, in that construction sites only operated if they were able to house their staff on site. And of course, hardwares were permitted to operate, but within limited hours. 80% of the goods entering Uganda cleared through Mombasa. And of course, with that lockdown, there was a clearing time that increased from 9 to 15 days. And of course, which resulted into hoarding of materials, and of course, costs increased. Another thing that affected some of our projects, for instance, which was starting, for instance, the Kampala Industrial Park, we were expecting specialists and expertise to fly in, but of course, with the closure of the borders and the airport, unfortunately, they were not able to come into the project, and of course, which delayed some of these projects. In essence, most of the materials that come through Uganda either come through Mombasa or Malaba, and of course, with that created a whole backload in terms of the supply chain, and of course, affected the construction industry. The net result of this was we were expecting, of course, a 5% growth. This has reduced significantly to 0.7 according to the global data. Some of the failure points as a result of this was suppliers are unable to fulfill orders due to labor and material shortages. Of course, this resulted into some of the projects being delayed. The other was transportation restrictions and low capacity for distributors to send goods. As a result, most long lead times cannot easily be achieved, and as a result, there's a lot of applications around for extension of time. We felt there was understaffed due to quarantines and medical safety and low supply, delays on construction and requests for EOTs on the project, and as a result, there's been a request for reviewing contracts. Limited stock by suppliers. This, of course, has resulted in increased prices. Stringent immigration controls, as I've already mentioned. We're currently working on the Kampala Industrial Park, and that, as a result, there's been a bit of delays because the lack of movement in terms of people to come through from the airports. The other is unable to reach end consumers due to the lack of delivery options. Of course, this has resulted into the volatile demand and in terms of delayed deliveries. Some of the, looking to the future and how to mitigate the impact of COVID on the supply chain, some of the things that we've actually tried to address and how we have been able to mitigate this risk is on some of our projects, we've encouraged cross-border SWAT teams. We've experienced this on the Hoima International Airport, whereby we have a team on the site which is engaging with some of the items that are actually being imported from the UK, because the project is funded through the UK Export Finance. And then it's a continuous engagement where they work as teams, where they manage the risk and mitigate and put in strategies in place. The other is develop contingency plans for future lockdowns. Of course, as Standard Housing, we've encouraged some of our clients to put in business continuity plans because COVID is not going away. And of course, looking forward in terms of the future, we need to clearly manage this risk and it's going to stay with us. So we've tried to come up with contingency plans. The other is innovate and continuously improve. That is keep communication with the supply chain. And that's, of course, with this conversation where we're trying to encourage suppliers and contractors. And that's where we've, had Siani, Lafarge, the developers, so that at least we encourage this communication to go forward. The other thing is the end-to-end supply chain using visibility or using artificial intelligence. As Standard Housing, since the lockdown, we've actually tried to digitalize most of our items in terms of both from working remotely and then also in terms of information that we've got. We're using systems like CostX and then, of course, benchmarking information so that we monitor costs on a regular basis. And I think this is also helping our clients in terms of understanding the movement of materials within this period. Of course, looking forward to the future, of course, one of the things that we're clearly trying to anticipate is some of the opportunities that are going to be coming on and how do we manage this supply chain. For instance, we are looking at the East African crude oil pipeline. His Excellency Yoweri Kaguta Museveni signed the contract with between Tanzania and ourselves for the East African crude oil pipeline. Now with that, of course, there's opportunities around how do we manage the supply chain, how do we ensure the materials are available, how do we ensure that this work is really done. The other, of course, is the standard gauge railway, which is, of course, supposed to be a continuation from the one that has been constructed in Kenya. As a result, this, of course, will assist us in terms of, as opposed to using the routes of using the trucks, we could use the standard gauge. Of course, this would be more efficient in terms of time. But of course, it's when this project shall become live. And of course, that's the major opportunity that we're looking at for the future. The other, of course, is the generation in terms of power. Of course, with the supply chain and in terms of manufacturers, they'll be looking at different options in terms of reducing their electricity costs and in terms of their production. The other is the highway network opportunities that we're looking forward. Going forward, I think for us to look into the future and to ask ourselves, especially how we can manage the supply chain, what and who are the business critical to our projects? So I think that's very important for us as a construction industry, in that we start having conversations right from whether it's the supplier, whether it's the client, or whether it's the manufacturer, to have open discussions around, in terms of where the prices are going, where do we see the cost savings, and especially now that with the challenges that we're facing during the lockdown, we need to clearly have those communications line open. The other is, are we communicating enough? Are we having both the commercial directors from the contractors discussing with the financial directors within the supply chain to understand the movement of prices. The other is also understanding the type of contracts that we're currently working on. I think it's important for us to have open discussions as teams, whether it's through speaking to the designers right from when these contracts, of course, are signed. Also, in terms of as either quantity surveyor, in terms of the pricing, are we negotiating the right prices with the suppliers? Because as a result of the effects of COVID, the prices are going up, but we clearly need to have communication lines opened and understanding what each of the different, in terms of either it's the suppliers or it's the designers or it's the actual contractor. The other is your commercial model appropriate for the market? Of course, pre-COVID, there were certain contracts that were signed. Does the contractor, is he aware of his obligations in the contract? Is there an opportunity to look at payment plans? Because also that could easily affect in terms of the construction. The other is in terms of with the payment plans, are we also speaking to the clients to understand their obligations in terms of when they delay in terms of payment? So it's critical that we understand the commercial model. The other is, are there alternative ways of working that may be appropriate during this period? For instance, should we be looking at prefabs at this stage to reduce the amount of laborers that would be on site in terms of, because of the isolation? The other is, are we using sustainability products that can easily be able to increase efficiency on the projects? The other, are we encouraging remote working in terms of some of where we have consultants working in different teams? For instance, we've also had that challenge either with one of the Aga Khan projects where we have various teams, whether they are working in Mexico, Dubai, or Uganda. In terms of them being on the ground, is it now being efficient? So those are the sort of questions I think we want to ask now in terms of the market, and also advise what we're experiencing as Turner & Townsend, but also at the same time, bring in industry players to advise further and encourage this discussion. And that's why we've managed to come up with a list of people to discuss on this panel. In that, I'm going to introduce each of them. We've got Manish. Just introduce Manish briefly. Manish is a managing director with Siani Brothers. He's a leader in terms of construction. He's also additionally on boards in the region and the company, and he plays an active role in shaping strategy and growth for Siani Brothers. The next person on the panel is Innocent. Innocent Nyahanga is a project manager, specialist with over 15 years experience. She's a development manager of Pearl Marina and works for Centum Investment, which is on the Lake Victoria, Garuga. She's also been involved in National Social Security Fund, Pension Tower. Innocent is a registered engineer under the Engineers Registration Board. The other person on the panel is Quantity Surveyor Immaculate Nabwawo. She holds a bachelor's degree in Quantity Surveyor from Makerere University. She's currently providing cost and commercial services on notable projects, for instance, Aga Khan and the Pearl Marina, and next screen with Turner & Townsend. I also introduced last but not least, Israel Chinkwasimire is the commercial director and oil and gas lead at Lafarge, where he's worked for more than 10 years in the construction industry. Welcome all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Right. The first question, I don't know if you've got your videos on. The first question goes to Manish Siani, and it goes like this. How does Siani Brothers feel about the effects of logistic curfews, movements of labor, etc., and how have you managed during this period of COVID?
Thank you, Elizabeth and Turner & Townsend for sponsoring this webinar and inviting me to join the panel. I'd also like to welcome our viewers that have joined in today. I think, Elizabeth, as far as your question goes, I think it's safe to say that just about every facet of economy, locally and globally, would have been affected by COVID pandemic, albeit at different spaces in time and at different magnitudes. Certainly for us, it has not been a nice feeling when you're least expecting a problem, especially. As Ugandans, the only shock to the system that was probably built into a business plan this year was naturally the general elections, which we're all aware is slated for early next year. Ourselves, I think we felt the first initial tremors of COVID around early February when, as you mentioned, when much of China went into lockdown. And quite a bit of our plant and equipment for projects that were at very advanced stages got affected. Stuff like plumbing materials, hardware, firefighting pipes, etc. And in fact, in a few weeks thereof, much of Europe started locking down, Italy, France, and we also saw a lockdown in South Africa. And these affected even more of our plant and equipment like generators, transformers, and materials like tiles, etc. We also noticed that factory acceptance tests, which were required on some projects, could not take place due to various travel bans and mandatory quarantine upon landing. As a result of this, it was very important for us to make our clients and consultants aware of potential delays owing to reasons beyond our control. As you mentioned, communication is key. At this point in time, although COVID was within our minds, there was actually no effect on labor and local material prices. I mean, business really seemed to be continuing as usual. The local effects really began to be felt from mid-March when the presidential directives, as you mentioned, started affecting the construction industry. Stuff like work from home, encamping of workers, suspension of public transport, introduction of standard operating procedures, social distancing rules, and you name them. I mean, this seriously impacted the movement of labor. And I believe this was largely due to the initial panic, uncertainty, and confusion. For ourselves, we noticed that sites went into a standstill mode from March 23rd and onwards up to about mid of May. And camping was not possible for us due to the nature of site, the contracts, the lack of approvals from clients and consultants owing to associated costs. And moreover, we ourselves also felt that this was actually likely to pose a huge, significant risk, owing to the nature of encamping that was advocated. Private vehicles were restricted, and it took quite a bit of time for us to lobby to get movement stickers for essential supervisors. Closures of airports posed a challenge for consultants and clients moving in and out. And as such, for us, decision-making even slowed down further. Standby costs kept accumulating. The usual costs of guarantees, insurances, full-time supervisory staff, equipment standby costs were all running whilst we were under lockdown. So at this point in time, I would say productivity was greatly affected. We were probably at about 0%. And naturally, this impacted the completion schedules as critical parts were hit, both from procurement delay as well as labor shortage perspective. Lockdown was lifted. For us, it took about a week to 10 days for labor across various supply chains to normalize. I could see that there was hunger and desire to get back to work across various chains, but still the output and productivity was way below. I mean, the reasons for this is, there was reduced working hours owing to curfew, time spent owing to maintaining standard operating procedures, clocking in and out, hand washing, temperature checks was significant. Observing social distancing rules meant we could not increase the labor on site. We had to increase rest periods because labor, whilst effecting heavy duty work, required more rest periods because they were wearing masks and it was quite difficult to perform efficiently. As I mentioned, costs had gone up due to maintaining SOPs. There was also additional transport costs that we had to pay to laborers because of public transport. I believe it was operating at that 50% occupancy basis. We then also started to see a hike in material prices. I mean, especially those being produced or supplied locally. I believe these were largely due to logistical challenges at borders. There was introduction of SOPs for those logistic drivers. There was turnaround time delays. And we also saw there were certain suppliers taking advantage of opportunistic profits by breaking agreed contractual terms and trying to take advantage of the demand exceeding supply.
Yeah.
So I believe in a nutshell for us, I mean, apple-to-apple comparison of productivity before and after, I'd say we are still at about 70% of our actual output. And to be honest, we continue to assume that this will be affected even further, given the increasing number of cases that we continue to witness.
Okay, no, thank you, and thank you very much. Just to pick on Innocent, and also from a Palm Mariner's perspective, how negative has this impact been? Is it substantial enough to affect the business case for some of the developments? It's our understanding, of course, you're having a big development there in terms of Innocent and just managing that expectation from either the people who are taking on the apartments and also in terms of your expectations of people moving in and with these sort of challenges. How has it affected your business case?
Thank you very much, Elizabeth, and a big welcome to all participants who are participating. Like Elizabeth said, Pearl Marina is quite a large development. It's a mixed-use development for Centrum Investment Company, PLC on 385 acres of land in Garuga, Entebbe. And we are currently undertaking construction for about 600 housing units to be followed up very quickly with the commercial and the retail aspects of the development. So these 600 units, we already have 65% of these units already purchased. So we are actually building what the clientele is waiting for. And what happened when COVID hit is that just like Manisha said, from the mid-March, we started having an impact in terms of construction slowdown and delays. It almost went to zero, but we were able to, on our development, to maintain a minimum level of construction, really for items where we already had supplies. And given the fact that we have most of our labor force staying within walking distance, we don't take up them, but they are within walking distance, we're able to have some minimum works ongoing. For some of the projects like the villa project, the apartments projects that needed a large number of labor force, that practically came to a standstill. We moved on until the opening, and then we took about another 2 weeks before we could actually say we were getting more up to speed. So in terms of the COVID effect on us, the biggest is that it has led to a delay in our delivery. So where we had made a promise to our clientele to deliver their housing, say by December 2020, that has moved on by about 3 to 4 months, actually delayed. That's what we're experiencing. The beauty though is that we have been very communicating actively with our clientele. They're aware of what is going on. They're aware of the challenges we've had. They're aware of the strategies we're putting in place, and we've been able to communicate new timelines for this delivery, and we are actually working towards that. Of course, the productivity, like Manish said, has really come down. It is lower now because of the standard operating procedures that have to be followed up. But that we are taking into account very seriously, because any breakdown in procedures can then lead to a pandemic on site and lead further to more delays, and that has to be considered really in line with what the government is putting in place. In terms of our business plan, what had actually happened is that our sales had been coming in much faster before the pandemic than had been visualized in the business plan. So as it stands, we've been able to maintain our business plan despite the slowdown. We've been able to maintain it, and we are looking forward to ensuring that this is enhanced as we move forward. So that's where we stand. We've had definitely an impact, mainly regarding the delay to the delivery, and which we know is going to stay on board for a little while. We've had to review our procurement strategies and our procurement timelines to align ourselves to the challenges in the supply chain. But otherwise, in terms of a business case, we are still firmly in place, and all is still looking good at this point in time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Innocent, for that. Just to bring in Israel into this conversation, how is HEMA Cement, as the manufacturers of a key material such as cement, affected, where a factory is required to shut down?
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. I think my first two peers have really tried to explain quite a bit in detail regarding what would have happened with the new terms that were set by government and from the presidential directives that were given. But just to bring you a little bit up to speed of what happened with Lafarge Wholesale Uganda, I think from around March, we began to see a bit of the impact, especially after the presidential directive. And what was required was that we had to have, if there was anybody going to be working on plants, we were going to have them stationed in the factories, or at least very close to the factories. And that naturally, looking at the population of the people that work in the factories, it was going to be absolutely impossible to have everybody working on site. So we had to downsize internally in our plants and to accommodate the few people that were going to be working for us. And naturally, what that does to you is it automatically slows down the activity or the production that you could have. And in our case, looking at the fact that we have an integrated plant in the west of the country, which is in Hima Kasese, but we also have a plant in Tororo. We have two cement factories. So in Kasese, we were impacted on the fact that we had to slow down our production of critical material, which is clinker. In Tororo, we were impacted basically on the materials that we import, because in Tororo we have a grinding station, and in Kasese we have an integrated plant that practically produces everything that we can use. So we could have had an advantage regarding the fact that we have an integrated plant in the West, but of course, reducing on the number of staff that were able to work kind of took that advantage away. And then we were impacted because of the lower production of our clinker. So yes, we were impacted in that regard. When it came to the East, of course, I think you know the new SOPs in place, what has had to happen at the border. A truck that would take about 2 to 3 days to get from Mombasa to Tororo, for example, is now taking about 7 days. What that means in short is that your supply chain or your logistics ability is reduced by almost 50 to 60%. And all of a sudden you're faced with a situation where even though you somehow manage to find ways in which you can get people to work on site, because naturally we believe in health and safety and we've been doing that for a while, you still are limited when it comes to logistics. That notwithstanding, we also are impacted by the fact that because of these increased number of days, turnaround of logistics, the costs are naturally going higher because the transporters are charging more. And then you have, as a result of SOPs, you need the certificates to cross the border, which cost money as well. And that is increasing the cost from time to time. And I think this addresses part of the issues that you were hearing before about why prices in the market are going up. Because naturally you want to cover up for the increased cost of production. That said, Elizabeth, I think on the side of cost of people, what is very important is people. We cannot work without people, definitely, and we must protect our people, and we believe in health and safety. So we, of course, on top of what the government had done, we'd already put SOPs in place, considering that one of our sites is in Western Uganda and closer to the border with the DRC, where there was a crisis of Ebola before COVID. So we had a few SOPs in place even before that kind of made it a bit easier for us when it came to COVID. But that notwithstanding, we're still impacted one way or the other.
Okay. No, thank you for that. But just to stay on you, Israel, and just pick up one of the questions that has also been picked up in the audience. What new or different supply chain technologies are being used or will be used in the near future to automate the supply chain and also to reduce, to stand the SOPs also? Sorry.
Okay, so a couple of things have happened in the recent months. Number one, we have had to go heavily digital in how we work with our clients. First of all, I think looking at how COVID started out, looking at March going into April, the hardwares were completely shut down before they were reopened later on. Some of our clients were facing exactly what we were facing regarding having to get their staff or their labor on site in a very short time, which was very difficult. So what we had to do was digitalize. So we had to find ways in which we can serve our customers without them necessarily being on site. We've had to deliver on behalf of our clients to construction sites and to their clients. So we kind of try to streamline ways in which we make it easy. The truck does not really need to go to the hardware at that point in time. How do we get the truck? If a hardware, for example, ordered, how do we get the truck to move from our plant and go directly to the construction site and not go to the hardware? And on top of that, we were able to manage to get our customers to order online in the comfort of their homes. They could then be able to place an order and the clients get served without necessarily having to interface with any of us. As you can see, Elizabeth, even currently, we've not been in office since COVID, since the first case of COVID in March. We're working from the confines of our homes and elsewhere. So this alone is telling you that the only way we're able to work, to communicate as teams, to communicate with our clients is by digitalizing. So that's the first case. The second case, of course, is now on the raw materials that we get for our grinding plant in Tororo from Mombasa. We've been going through a series of exchanges, of course, with our transporters. But that notwithstanding, you know that there's all of a sudden a scarcity in logistics as a result of the increased turnaround of trucks. So we have been beefing up our logistics to try and meet up the demand, considering the fact that the logistics that we had that was sustaining the market at the time, all of a sudden is 50% short. So these are works in progress. These are increasing costs of everybody in the construction sector, but we continue to work around that.
Okay, thank you very much, Israel. Now just to pull in Immaculate, especially around increase in construction prices. The question to you, Immaculate, is in the current marketplace, certainty of the outcome around capital investments and operating costs is paramount. Of course, you know, with these cost increases, it's going to be affecting the clients. How do we increase accuracy at the early stages of estimating through to the life cycle estimating while giving consideration to the supply chain during these circumstances?
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. I think the first thing that we should all really do is appreciate the fact that COVID-19 has been and is a black swan event, and therefore it's very important to clearly communicate this to our clients and manage the expectations. But just to take us maybe a step back, according to the RICS life cycle costing guidance note, the typical measure of a total life cycle cost of any project is basically a lump sum that's going to represent the sum of your capital cost and your future cash flows. So as we're preparing these estimates, we basically need to think about three questions. What are we going to be doing on the project? When will it be done? And how much it will cost? So if I were to draw our attention to the cost, we also need to go down further to understand what parameters feed into that estimate that you're trying to give your client in these uncertain times. Of course, there are those that go without, say, like the opportunity cost, the actual cost of construction. You're looking at maybe professional fees, you're looking at tax allowances, and all these form part of the supply chain ecosystem. So identifying how to mitigate and streamline this can help us get an accurate estimate. But currently what we're seeing on the projects that we're handling, one, of course, the most critical is trying to assess items that are critical for your project. Understand their lead times, understand how it's being affected. Where possible, we're actually engaging directly with suppliers and also contracting them so that we can lock down that price as early as possible. The second thing that can be considered in line with giving accurate estimates in this time is engaging with your shipping line suppliers. You know, we have the likes of freight forwarders in Uganda, basically understanding on their channel, where has the disruption been? Can the shipping routes recover from what has happened? What alternative routes are they providing? So that even as you're going back to your client, these logistics are things that you have in mind in order to give a robust cost. Third, I think we also need to ensure the viability of finance. And by that, I mean, you know, still goes back to engagement and communication, as you have previously said. And we just need to get in touch with these financial institutions. They have put across different fiscal policies. They have put across different guidelines on how financing and the loans and the like are going to be taken on during and even post-COVID. So I think it's important to tap into that knowledge and then advise our clients accordingly. Maybe the other thing I could suggest is we need to establish currency volatility, whereby you can do this through benchmarking with construction indices, for example, that are usually published by the Uganda Bureau of Standards. And then we also can just get direct into the market and just benchmark and try and understand with the suppliers, you know, what was the cost before COVID and what is it now, so that as you're preparing your estimate, it's a more robust answer. The other point could be, now that we have all these standard operating procedures from the government, some of this can actually be quantified in our bills of quantities or our estimates. So this can either be considered, say, in our preliminaries, if it's a health and safety cost, And then what we're currently seeing on our projects is giving a contingency of about 2 to 3%, which should really be sufficient if the QS has done their job in terms of procurement and market testing and built all these into the BOQ. And again, that cost should only be spent if justifiable according to COVID. As I conclude, I also think one thing that's very important is we need to invest in the investment. And by that I mean, we need to start encouraging both clients and consultants, even contractors, to just be able to put in money, a larger sum of money up front, so that they can get some level of certainty that they require. And of course, now we're seeing this through investing in technology, just like Israel has said, so that if you're looking at, just like Elizabeth, you had mentioned, the end-to-end supply chain visibility through artificial intelligence. In some regions in the world, we're seeing that they're using digital control towers. And by these are just basically teams of people who are on ground, who have access to data on shipments, inventory, supply chains, so they can literally inform whoever is estimating where the delays are going to be seen, at what point and when, so that even as you're costing throughout the life of the project, you have a direction on where you're going, and this can inform your clients better. So it's really vital that we also appreciate that the industry is transitioning into a VUCA world. And the VUCA world is whereby, it's volatile, there's uncertainty, there's complexity, there's ambiguity in the construction industry. So if we as stakeholders and also members of the supply chain can basically just get back to the drawing board and try and understand where the loose ends are in this chain, communicate as much as possible, I believe we should be able to inform our clients better with the estimates that we're producing.
No, thank you very much, Immaculate, for that. I think with that, I'll just pick up some of the questions also that have come through from the attendees. And I think this one goes to Manish. But I think one of the things that have come up is what suggestions and tips can be given to contractors on how to get through the short and medium times as we start to better understand the long-term effects of COVID?
Well, I think, Elizabeth, I don't think there is a one-size-fits-all solution here, given that the effects are very dynamic in nature. But from our very brief experience, and what I would like to say to the viewers is, I think be very careful with making 100% upfront payments, especially to global suppliers, even if it's a regular supply chain partner. Owing to COVID, their risk profiles could have changed, or the jurisdictions where they are established could perhaps again enforce a lockdown and catch you off guard. Ourselves, we made a payment for a huge order for tiles to Johannesburg, to a very regular supplier that we normally deal with, just before their lockdown, and we were caught off guard. As soon as the transfers were made, there was a cash flow constraint because Joburg was under lockdown, and with hindsight, we should have opted for other forms of payment. Perhaps price point may not necessarily be the driver of choice, but close proximity, efficiently evaluated supply chain, and jurisdiction risks should be considered when making a choice. Suppliers should, I think, as Immaculate also pointed out, suppliers should direct their finance teams to maximize liquidity by exploring avenues that generate cash quickly, perhaps prioritizing clients that have strong payment capacity, collecting dues, and selling off all inventories quickly. I don't think it's the time to do business on credit. Smaller profits, but cash upon delivery will be the name of the game to survive through the turbulent waters. I've seen that in being employed in amongst a number of these manufacturers these days, and I think perhaps this is the very reason why. Organizations should perhaps begin diversifying their supply networks by multi-sourcing from global and local suppliers, or alternative sites of single suppliers, to avoid risk associated with localized disruptions. Partnerships with regional distributors of same products could come in handy at this time. Such partnerships would allow suppliers to move about stocks, and because of the supply shrinkage, provided that the demand always exceeds the supply, price increase due to logistic costs, which we've all been talking about, will not be relevant. On the plus side, I think for the local suppliers and hardware operators to the construction industry, I think they will continue to see a rise in demand for construction materials as the lockdown significantly suppress the market in the short term. And this, I think, will take some time to normalize. But it's important that if you have stocks in hand, I mean, you can be able to reap short-term rewards from the rather bullish market. But they must also be careful about short shelf life goods and materials. I mean, there's a risk, but there's also a tremendous opportunity. Finally, I think transparency is key, as we all mentioned. Suppliers need to actively engage with their customers, keep informing them about any potential price hikes or expected shortages or going to increase logistical costs at border points, as Israel has mentioned. I think such information flows would tighten the bond and further lock in loyalty both in the short and long run, as opposed to somebody thinking that it's just an opportunistic gain that a supplier is trying to make. So I think some of these are probably the short and medium term pointers which may just be able to pick up from.
Okay, thank you very much. Just of course, without of course forgetting, I have to add some more from the attendees. I just had one more question for both Innocent and Israel. Any parting shots on the COVID and the future of the construction industry? Maybe if Israel can come in from a manufacturer's perspective. Do you have any parting notes that you'd have on COVID and the future of the construction industry, especially seeing your involvement, especially Lafarge in the oil and gas sector and all the other opportunities from an infrastructure perspective that are planned for Uganda, and just how it would relate to COVID and the situation?
Well, Elizabeth, first of all, I think we have to first of all learn how to live with the fact that COVID is here, and not for the short term. And I think we've gotten to see that in the last couple of months from when this crisis started. We had so many forecasts. Everybody believed maybe 2 months, maybe 3 months. I mean, we're definitely about to make a year, and I think it's still ongoing. No vaccine has come up yet. And seeing the way the world has changed because of COVID, we have learned how to work in different ways so far. And I think that's going to stick to. I think there are so many organizations that have managed to learn to work from home and moving away from working from offices. Mine is one of them. I think that we now have to learn to build local capacity even more. We know that we cannot rely on importation for long. We need to build local capacity, whether it is in production. We have one line of our plants that is locally producing all materials, but we have another line that relies quite a bit on importation because it's the grinding station. So we must build local capacity, and not just in production when it comes to materials that we supply, but also building local capacity in employees amongst our staff, so that we have less reliance on experts. So that regardless of whether we have challenges with pandemics like COVID, we can still continue to operate. But also, we have had to learn how to manage our finances better, looking at our clients and the nature of our customers, just like Manish, who have major projects for the government, and we know how the government pays, but we must work on our cash flows. We've had to sit around the tables with our clients and our suppliers, and other stakeholders, and renegotiate payment terms to stay afloat, because this is where the world is going. So we have to change the way we work. We have to, even though it was uncomfortable because of adaptability, we've had to change towards digital in dealing with our clients, which reduces the face time, but still keeps you communicating. Yes, we will not meet as often as we did face-to-face, but we know that we will continue to communicate digitally, just like this meeting is happening. Before this COVID situation, we had to have a conference somewhere in one of the major hotels, but today we're having a discussion around the table, and we are all able to communicate what we have to communicate. So the world is changing, and we have to change with it. And I think we have to keep the emphasis on protecting our people. Health and safety remains fundamental and a core priority and belief and value in our organization. We have to protect our people, but also protect the employment. So we need to find ways of beefing up production amidst the challenges of logistics and supply chain, so that our employees' jobs are safe, and we can continue to contribute to the economy in several ways. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Israel. And yourself, Innocent, as a developer Any parting shots on COVID and the future of the construction industry? I know you have a very big development in terms of Pearl Marina, and we're excited about it. If any parting remarks on this? Sorry, Innocent, I think you're frozen.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. What I would want to say is that as a developer, we have to become very, very agile in the way that we progress. We have to be very flexible, in all that we do, including our interactions with our clients and also our interactions with the contractor. We need to be able to be aware of the challenges, especially what is impacting the construction is the supply chain. How do we come in as developers to assist in this and still ensure that whereas we are having delays, we are still able to deliver to what we have indicated to the clients. We have to be able to be flexible with our clientele. We have to actively communicate with them. They should be able to know where we are at and what the outcomes are in terms of their delivery, in terms of their payment terms, in terms of the products that we have on board. So basically, we have to ensure that we move forward even as the pandemic is with us. And critical to this is how do we sustain the works as we have the pandemic ongoing. We have to ensure that the contractor is having in place the required standard operating procedures. We have to ensure that we're able to operate with some staff working off-site and others working. We can no longer have full project teams on site. How do we ensure that we are still having progress on construction sites despite the fact that you can't have everyone in? So that is very, very critical. The adoption of digitalization in the aspect of construction has come. How do we communicate with our suppliers digitally? How do they deliver? How do we make payments online? How do we verify what has been delivered? All that is very, very critical. And we have to have the flexibility to adapt to available options to ensure that construction is still ongoing and delivery is actually in place. As a developer, personally, we have gone to the extent of putting in place emergency plans, whereas they may not be a lockdown countrywide, but they could be a lockdown at your location if one of your staff is found positive. So what are the plans and systems in place to ensure that you are actually still going to have works continue and deliver to promise? So that is really very critical. COVID is here with us, and we have to still work and deliver on both sides of the table, both down the lane with the contractor and also with our clients who have to receive the completed product. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. I think the last question, just to pick up, I think maybe to Marklet and Manish will contribute to it. One of the questions that have come up is, as the business community, do we have any platform / dialogue with the government to inform them around the policies that are taking place and also the issues and the challenges that are facing the construction industry, and how are we participating? So maybe Immaculate can go ahead from a consultant's perspective, and then Manish from a contractor's perspective.
Okay, thank you so much, Elizabeth. I think what we are currently seeing in terms of that is, from the consultant's perspective, the different consultants, be it architects, be it quantity surveyors, have governing bodies. Now, for example, we have the Institution of Surveyors of Uganda, through which you can channel these grievances or concerns, and then they carry this up the supply chain. So the most immediate would, of course, be the institutions that govern your profession, and then those channel the information back to the government and vice versa. Thank you.
Thank you. Manish?
Okay, yeah, thanks, Elizabeth. I think from that perspective, of course, there are institutions in place similarly for contractors, just like as it's there for consultants as well. There has been quite a bit of recent reorganization of, under the Ministry of Works. There's been the National Building Review Board. There has been the contractors' old UNAPSEC organization, which has always been there. There has been, of course, you've got the PPDA, the Public Procurement Body, that's quite active as well. Certainly for us, having a lot of government contracts, all these bodies do come in place quite handy. But what we've seen is that I think different contractors go through different experiences, primarily because of different types of contracts. So if you've got a FIDIC contract and if you've got a PPDA contract that's originating from within the public sector locally, these all have different measures. I mean, they will have different definitions for different aspects of delays or effects. Some may have even pandemics covered, some may not have. So I think as far as a person as a contractor is concerned, it's very important that you don't generalize your problems. You've got to make sure that you're able to, as you said, dialogue, communicate very effectively with your supply chain partners, in particular your consultants, and I think be very honest with your employers. I mean, what we've seen and how we've been able to sail through this difficult period during COVID and post-COVID is, to be honest, dialogue. If we were to stick by our contracts, we understand clearly that this is not something that was created by the employer, neither was it created by ourselves. So as contractors, I think it's very important that you sit on the table, you discuss with the direct partner as opposed to lobbying through a third party, because the third party may probably not understand your problem or may have other interests per se, whether it's the lawyer or whether it's an institution. So what we've tried to do is really take an approach where try to minimize our losses as much as possible. But I think this is not the environment to make gains. It's all about floating your head above the pool, being able to ride through, being able to understand, being able to be smart. And I think for us, we see that it's about making sure that your finances are in place and in a right manner. Why I've been advocating that this is not the time to do business on credit is your collection should be, it's very important that you focus on your collections. It's very important that you can stay afloat. It's about OPEX. It's no longer about CAPEX. And if I was to put in a new investment right now, I'd think twice, unless if I am a mall operator or maybe a hotel operator, because this is really the time to do investments. Because I think 2-3 years down the road, we will see all these things normalizing. So definitely institutions are placed, but I think you as a professional are best placed to make the decisions in the right manner. We can lobby, but I think end of the day, it all starts from your own desk.
Yes. Okay. No, thank you, Manish. I think we're running out of time, and I think we've come to the end of our discussion. First of all, I'd like to thank all the panelists for taking their time. And also I'd like to thank, in terms of all the attendees, for being able to join us in this discussion. This is, of course, not the end of the discussion. There's definitely more that's going to be coming out, either from our side or from our partners. And then in terms of if there are any questions, I know I haven't finished most of the questions because we've run out of time. But Stan and Townsend, please drop us a line. We'd be definitely interested in supporting you, whether it's from a client's perspective or it's from a contractor's perspective. We're basically open up to feedback and also to assisting you during these difficult times. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Elizabeth, and thank you to all the panelists. It was a great session and very interactive from the audience. And thank you once again to Turner and Townsend for making this possible and sponsoring this event and bringing together the panel. So thank you once again to the panelists, to Elizabeth, to the moderator. And once again, just a reminder to the audience, next week we'll be continuing these discussions at the API Summit Virtual. We'll be having various discussions on the different sectors, countries, finance, development, construction, and so forth. So we've got a whole week lined up, and you'll also be able to interact and engage with one another on the networking platform, so that you can register on the API Summit website. And that concludes today's proceedings. We'll be having a session tomorrow in Mozambique, and then obviously the API Summit Virtual next week. So thank you once again to the audience, to Turner Townsend, to Elizabeth, the panel. Thank you very much, and we look forward to continuing the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.